If you cannot even follow a simple rule, then you do not belong in this house, Ethan Blackwood said coldly, his voice cutting through the marble hallway like a blade. The silver tray trembled slightly in Lily Carter's hands, though her face remained still, almost eerily calm. She had arrived less than 1 hour ago, stepping into a world of polished floors, towering ceilings, and silence that felt heavier than any noise. The mansion stretched over 10,000 square feet, each corner echoing with wealth and control, yet somehow empty. Ethan stood at the top of the staircase, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence commanding and distant. When a glass on the tray tilted just a fraction too far, he did not hesitate. He stepped forward, took the tray from her hands, and set it down with deliberate force before speaking again, quieter this time, but sharper. In this house, you do not speak unless I ask you to. You do not think unless I require it. You exist to do your job. Nothing more. Lily lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in quiet acknowledgement. She did not argue. She did not apologize. She simply nodded once. The head housekeeper shifted uncomfortably nearby, clearly expecting a reaction, perhaps tears or at least a stammered excuse, but none came. And somehow, that silence lingered longer than any protest ever could. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. The moment passed, but something subtle remained, something Ethan could not immediately name. Lily moved with quiet precision, picking up a folded linen napkin from the nearby console and adjusting it on the tray as if nothing had happened. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. She walked past him without a word, her soft footsteps barely audible against the marble floor. Ethan watched her go, a faint crease forming between his brows. He had seen fear before. He had seen desperation, anger, even defiance. But this was different. This was silence, not empty, but full of something he could not control. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and painted the sky in muted shades of orange and gray, Lily stood alone in the vast kitchen, carefully preparing his evening tea exactly as instructed. 8 ounces of water, heated to just below boiling, steeped for precisely 3 minutes. Every movement measured, every detail exact. She placed the cup on a tray, added a single slice of lemon, and paused for just a second, her fingers brushing lightly against the porcelain as if grounding herself. Somewhere above, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the mansion. Ethan was moving again, pacing as he often did, restless in a home that felt more like a fortress than a sanctuary. And for the first time since she arrived, Lily lifted her eyes, not in fear, but in quiet observation, as if she already understood something about this man that he had spent years trying to hide. And in that silence, something had already begun to change. The next morning arrives quietly, but nothing about the mansion feels different. The air is still heavy, the silence still stretches across every polished surface, and yet Lily Carter moves through it, as if she has already learned its rhythm. She wakes before sunrise in the small staff quarters tucked behind the west wing, a narrow room with a single bed and a window that barely lets in the early light. Her alarm does not ring because she does not own one. Instead, she opens her eyes at exactly 5 in the morning, as if her body has been trained by years of necessity rather than comfort. For a moment, she sits still on the edge of the bed, her hands resting gently on her knees, her breathing slow and controlled. Then she reaches for a folded photograph tucked carefully inside her bag. The edges are worn, the image slightly faded. A young boy smiles back at her, his eyes bright despite the faint hospital bracelet around his wrist. Lily's thumb brushes lightly across the photo, a silent promise passing between her and the memory it holds. She slips it back into place and stands, already composed, already prepared to face another day inside a house that does not feel like a home. By 6 in the morning, she is in the kitchen. The staff has not fully arrived yet, and the space is quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a wall clock. Lily begins her routine without hesitation. She measures coffee grounds precisely, fills the kettle with 8 ounces of water, and places it on the stove. Every movement is deliberate, almost ritualistic. There is no wasted motion, no sign of distraction. When the housekeeper enters 20 minutes later, she pauses in the doorway, watching Lily with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Most new staff members stumble during their first days, overwhelmed by the rules, intimidated by Ethan Blackwood's presence. But Lily does not stumble. She does not ask questions. She simply works. "You should be careful," the housekeeper finally says, her voice low. Mr. Blackwood does not tolerate mistakes. Lily turns her head slightly, acknowledging the words without fully facing her. She does not respond. The housekeeper frowns, unsettled by the lack of reaction, then shakes her head and continues on her way. Upstairs, Ethan is already awake. He stands near the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, looking out over the sprawling grounds that stretch beyond the mansion. The city skyline sits faintly in the distance, a reminder of the empire he controls, yet none of it seems to ease the tension in his shoulders. He takes a slow breath, then another, but the restlessness remains. Something from the night before lingers in his mind, an image he cannot shake. The way Lily had stood there, silent, unmoved, as if his words had passed through her without leaving a mark. It irritates him more than defiance ever could. At precisely 7 in the morning, there is a soft knock at his office door. Ethan does not answer immediately. The knock comes again, just once, measured and respectful. "Enter," he finally says. The door opens quietly, and Lily steps inside, carrying a tray with his morning coffee prepared exactly to his specifications. She places it on his desk with steady hands, her gaze lowered but not fearful. Ethan watches her closely this time, searching for something, any sign of weakness, hesitation, or resentment. But there is nothing. Only calm. Only silence. "Did anyone explain the rules to you properly?" he asks, his tone sharp but controlled. Lily remains still for a brief moment, then gives a small nod. No words. Ethan's jaw tightens slightly. "Then you understand what happens when those rules are broken." Another nod. Still no words. The silence stretches between them, heavier now, almost deliberate. For a second, Ethan considers pushing further, forcing a reaction, breaking whatever quiet shield she has built around herself. But instead, he leans back, slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studies her. "We will see how long that lasts," he says quietly. Lily does not respond. She turns and walks toward the door with the same quiet precision, her footsteps barely audible. As the door closes behind her, Ethan exhales slowly, unaware that for the first time in a very long time, someone has entered his world without bending to it. And somewhere deep beneath his control, something unfamiliar begins to take shape, not yet understood, but impossible to ignore. By midday, the mansion feels even larger than before, not because of its size, but because of the way sound disappears within it. Every hallway absorbs footsteps. Every room swallows echoes, leaving behind a silence that feels intentional, as if the house itself has learned to remain quiet under Ethan Blackwood's control. Lily moves through that silence without disturbing it. She cleans the long dining table, polishing each surface until it reflects the light from the tall windows, then adjusts the chairs so they align perfectly with the edges. She dusts the shelves in the study, careful not to shift a single object out of place. Even the air seems to settle around her, undisturbed, as if it accepts her presence more easily than it accepts anyone else's. The other staff members begin to notice. In the laundry room, 2 housemaids whisper as they fold linens, their voices low but sharp with curiosity. She has not said a word all morning. One of them murmurs, "Not even when he spoke to her like that yesterday." The other shakes her head slowly. It is not normal. Everyone reacts eventually, but Lily does not. She continues her work, unaffected by the glances, untouched by the quiet speculation that follows her from room to room. In the early afternoon, she enters the West Wing, a part of the mansion that most of the staff avoids unless instructed otherwise. The hallway here is dimmer, the windows smaller, the atmosphere heavier. At the end of the corridor stands a closed door, darker than the rest, its polished surface untouched by fingerprints or dust. Lily pauses for just a moment, her hand hovering near the handle, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. Something about this space feels different, like a memory held too tightly. She does not open the door. Instead, she kneels slightly and begins to clean. The baseboards along the wall, her movements careful, respectful, as if she understands that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Upstairs, Ethan sits at his desk, but his attention drifts. The numbers on his screen blur slightly, contracts and reports losing their sharp edges as his mind returns again and again to the same question. Why does she not react? He has built his entire world on control. Employees respond. Partners negotiate. Even silence, in his experience, has always been a form of resistance or fear. But Lily's silence is neither. It does not challenge him. It does not submit. It simply exists, steady and unbroken, and that unsettles him more than anything else. He stands abruptly, pushing his chair back with a quiet scrape against the floor, and steps into the hallway. His footsteps are firm, deliberate, echoing faintly as he moves toward the west wing without fully realizing why. When he turns the corner, he stops. Lily is there, kneeling near the wall, her focus entirely on her work. For a moment, he watches her without speaking. The light from a nearby window falls across her face, softening her features, revealing a calm that feels out of place in a house like this. "Who told you to come here?" he asks suddenly, his voice sharper than intended. Lily looks up slowly, meeting his gaze for the briefest second before lowering her eyes again. She does not answer. Ethan steps closer, his presence filling the narrow hallway. "This area is not part of your assigned duties," he continues, his tone tightening. "You do not decide where you work." Still nothing. No explanation. No apology. Just that same quiet composure. Something flickers across his expression, not anger exactly, but something more complicated, something that edges toward frustration without fully becoming it. "Look at me when I speak to you," he says. This time Lily obeys. She lifts her eyes, steady and clear, and for a second, the silence between them shifts. It is no longer empty. It is filled with something unspoken, something that presses against the edges of Ethan's control. He holds her gaze, expecting to find fear or defiance, but instead he finds something else entirely. Recognition, not of who he is, but of something deeper, something he has spent years trying to bury. He looks away first. The moment breaks, sharp and sudden, like a thread pulled too tight. "Finish your work and return to the main areas," he says, his voice lower now, more controlled. Lily nods once, the movement small but deliberate, and returns to cleaning as if nothing has happened. Ethan turns and walks away, but the silence follows him this time, no longer something he commands, but something that lingers just beyond his reach, growing stronger with every step he takes. That evening, the mansion settles into a quiet routine, but something beneath the surface has shifted in a way no one can quite name. The golden light from the chandeliers casts long shadows across the marble floors, and a faint hum of distant traffic filters through the tall windows, reminding anyone who listens closely that the world outside still exists. Inside, however, everything moves according to Ethan Blackwood's rules. Dinner is served at exactly 7 in the evening, no earlier, no later. The long dining table is set with precision, every utensil aligned, every glass polished to a perfect shine. Lily stands near the edge of the room, her posture straight, her presence almost invisible despite being only a few feet away. When Ethan enters, the room seems to tighten around him. His expression is unreadable, his steps measured, his attention already focused on something distant, something beyond the walls of his own home. He takes his seat without acknowledging anyone, and the staff begins their silent choreography. Plates are placed, wine is poured, movements executed with careful discipline. Lily watches, learning each detail, each unspoken expectation. When it is her turn, she steps forward with the main course, her hand steady as she sets the plate before him. For a moment, everything appears flawless. Then, as she adjusts the position of the fork by a fraction of an inch, Ethan's voice cuts through the room again. Stop! The single word lands heavily. Lily freezes, her hand still hovering near the table. Ethan's gaze shifts downward, examining the setting with sharp precision. Did you move that? He asks, his tone calm, but edged with something colder. Lily remains still. No answer. The silence stretches, thick and deliberate. A few of the staff exchange nervous glances, already anticipating what comes next. Ethan leans back slightly in his chair, his eyes lifting to meet hers. I did not ask for silence, he says quietly. I asked a question. Lily lifts her gaze, just enough to acknowledge him, then gives a small, almost imperceptible nod. That is all. No words. No explanation. The reaction is so minimal, so controlled, that it seems to disrupt the very rhythm of the room. Ethan's fingers tighten slightly against the edge of the table. So you admit you altered the setting, he continues, his voice gaining a sharper edge. Still nothing beyond that single nod. No apology. No justification. The absence of defense feels louder than any excuse. For a brief second, something flickers in Ethan's expression again, something that is not quite anger, but not quite understanding either. He studies her as if trying to decode a language he has never encountered before. Then, with a sudden movement, he sets his utensils down. The faint sound echoes in the silence. You are here to follow instructions, not to improve them, he says. Do not mistake your role. Lily lowers her gaze once more, her expression unchanged. Around them, the staff remains frozen, caught between tension and expectation. But then something unexpected happens. Lily reaches out calmly and adjusts the fork back to its original position, exactly as it had been before. The motion is smooth, precise, almost ritualistic. When she withdraws her hand, she steps back into place without a word, without hesitation. The correction is immediate, complete, and final. Ethan watches the movement closely, his attention narrowing. There is no resentment in her actions, no sign of defiance, not even submission. Only quiet acceptance, as if the moment itself holds no weight for her at all. And that, more than anything, unsettles him. The rest of the dinner continues in silence, but it is no longer the same silence as before. It feels different now, heavier, charged with something unspoken. Ethan finds himself distracted, his focus drifting away from the meal in front of him. His mind returns again and again to that single moment, the way she had responded, or rather, the way she had not responded at all. When the meal ends, he stands abruptly, his chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the floor. Without a word, he leaves the room, his footsteps echoing faintly down the hallway. Lily remains where she is for a moment, her hands resting lightly at her sides. Then she begins to clear the table, her movements as steady as ever. But as she lifts one of the plates, her fingers pause for the briefest second, almost imperceptible. A small breath escapes her, quiet and controlled, before she continues her work. No one notices, or perhaps no one understands what they are seeing. Upstairs, Ethan stops in the middle of the corridor, his hand resting briefly against the wall as if grounding himself. The image returns again, uninvited, persistent. Not the mistake, not the correction, but the silence. It follows him, lingers with him, settles into the spaces he once controlled completely. And for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwood feels something unfamiliar pressing against his carefully built world. Not anger, not authority, something quieter, something that does not obey him at all. The following morning arrives with a quiet stillness that seems heavier than the day before, as if the mansion itself is holding on to something unspoken. Sunlight filters through the tall windows in soft, muted lines, stretching across the polished floors and climbing slowly up the walls. Lily moves through the early hours with the same calm precision, preparing the day before anyone else fully awakens. She finishes the breakfast setup, aligns every detail, and steps away, just as the clock approaches 7 in the morning. Nothing is out of place. Nothing invites correction. And yet, something lingers in the air, something she cannot see but can feel. Upstairs, Ethan stands in front of a closed door at the end of the east corridor. His hand rests on the handle, unmoving. This room is different from the rest of the house. It is not part of his routine. It is not part of his control. For a long moment, he does nothing, his expression tightening slightly as if caught between instinct and resistance. Then, without warning, he turns away and walks back toward his office, leaving the door unopened, the past undisturbed. Downstairs, Lily begins her next task, moving into the West Wing once more. The corridor is quiet, the same dim light stretching along the walls. This time, however, something catches her attention. On a narrow console table near the closed door, a small object rests slightly out of alignment. It is subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it breaks the perfect order of the house. Lily steps closer, her movements careful. It is a framed photograph, turned just slightly away from the wall, as if it had been disturbed and never corrected. She pauses for a brief moment, her eyes resting on the image. A woman stands in the photograph, her expression soft, her posture elegant, her presence warm in a way that contrasts sharply with the cold atmosphere of the mansion. There is something about the image that feels important, not because of what it shows, but because of what it holds. Lily reaches out slowly and adjusts the frame, returning it to its proper position. The motion is gentle, almost reverent, as if she understands without being told that this is not just an object, but a memory. She turns to leave, but then stops. A faint smudge remains on the glass, barely visible unless the light hits it just right. Without hesitation, she takes a soft cloth from her pocket and wipes it clean, restoring the surface to clarity. The woman's face in the photograph becomes sharper, brighter, as if brought back into focus after being forgotten. Lily studies it for a second longer, her expression unchanged, but her stillness carrying a quiet weight. Then she steps back and continues down the corridor, leaving everything exactly as it should be. Later that afternoon, Ethan passes through the same hallway. His pace slows as he approaches the console table, something instinctive drawing his attention. He stops. The photograph is different, not changed in any obvious way, but something about it feels clearer. He steps closer, his gaze narrowing slightly. The frame is perfectly aligned now, the glass spotless, the image undisturbed. For a moment, he simply stands there, looking at the woman in the photograph. His mother. The memory presses against him, without warning, sharp and immediate. He had not touched that frame in years. He had not allowed anyone else to either. And yet now, it stands there as if it has been quietly restored, not altered, not replaced, just cared for. Ethan's jaw tightens slightly, his hand lifting toward the frame before stopping just short of contact. He does not touch it. He does not move it. Instead, he lowers his hand slowly, his expression unreadable. A subtle shift passes through him, something small but undeniable. Not anger, not control, something closer to recognition. He turns away, but his steps are slower now, less certain than before. Downstairs, Lily continues her work as usual, unaware that her quiet action has reached further than any words ever could. The house remains silent, but it is no longer the same silence. It carries something new within it, something fragile and unfamiliar. And somewhere within Ethan Blackwood's carefully controlled world, a memory has been stirred, not by force, not by defiance, but by the smallest act of care. The tension does not break the next day. It deepens. By late afternoon, the mansion prepares for an evening gathering, one of Ethan Blackwood's private business dinners where every detail must reflect precision, control, and power. The staff moves faster than usual, footsteps quicker, voices lower, each person aware that even the smallest mistake will not go unnoticed. Lily works among them, silent as always, but her presence has begun to feel different, not invisible, but quietly constant, like something that cannot be moved once it is settled. She polishes the glassware, aligns the table settings, and adjusts the lighting so that it casts the exact tone Ethan prefers, warm but not inviting, elegant but distant. Everything is ready. Everything is perfect. Or at least it should be. Ethan stands in the main hall as the first guests begin to arrive, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. He greets them with controlled politeness, every word measured, every gesture intentional. To them, he is exactly what they expect, a man of authority, of discipline, of unshakable control. But beneath that surface, something unsettles him. His eyes move briefly across the room, landing on Lily as she carries a tray of drinks toward the seating area. She moves with the same quiet precision, her gaze lowered, her steps steady. For a moment, he watches her longer than necessary, his attention narrowing. Then, as if pulled by something he cannot fully understand, he decides to act. "You!" he calls out sharply, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. The room stills just enough for the word to be noticed. Lily stops immediately and turns, her posture straight, her expression unchanged. She walks toward him, the tray balanced perfectly in her hands. Several guests glance between them, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Ethan steps closer, his gaze fixed on her. "Serve Mr. Harrison first," he says, gesturing toward one of his most important business partners seated nearby. "And make sure you do it properly." The instruction itself is simple, but the tone carries something else, something deliberate. A test. Lily nods once and turns toward the guest. She approaches with calm precision, offering the tray without a word. Mr. Harrison smiles politely and takes a glass, clearly unaware of the tension woven into the moment. Everything appears flawless. But Ethan is not finished. "Stop," he says again, louder this time. The room quiets further. Lily pauses mid-step, her hand still steady on the tray. Ethan steps forward, closing the distance between them in full view of everyone. "That is not how it is done," he says, his voice sharp enough to draw full attention now. "When you serve in this house, you announce the drink, you make eye contact, and you wait for acknowledgement. Or is that too complicated for you to understand?" A faint ripple moves through the guests, subtle but present. This is no longer just instruction. This is humiliation. Lily remains still for a moment. Then, without any visible change in expression, she turns back toward Mr. Harrison. She meets his eyes gently, just as instructed, and in a soft, steady voice she says, "Your drink, sir." It is the first time anyone in the room has heard her speak. Her voice is calm, clear, and completely without fear. Mr. Harrison nods, slightly surprised but pleased, and takes the glass again as if the moment has reset itself. Lily steps back into place, silent once more. The room exhales, conversation slowly returning, but something has shifted. Ethan stands there, watching her, something tightening in his chest. He had expected hesitation. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps even a visible crack in her composure. Instead, she followed his instruction perfectly, without resistance, without resentment, and without giving him anything to push against. The control he reached for slips just slightly through his grasp. For the rest of the evening, Ethan finds himself distracted. His conversations lose their sharpness, his focus drifting back again and again to that single moment. Not the correction, not the mistake, but the way she had spoken, and then return to silence as if nothing had happened. As the guests begin to leave and the house quiets once more, Ethan remains standing in the empty hall. The echoes of the evening fade, but the feeling does not. Somewhere within him, a familiar instinct rises, the need to reassert control, to break whatever it is that resists him. And yet, beneath that instinct, something else begins to form, quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous. Not anger, not authority, curiosity. And for Ethan Blackwood, that may be the first crack in everything he has built. The night fades into a quieter rhythm, but the tension that lingers between Ethan Blackwood and Lily Carter does not disappear. It changes shape. The following afternoon, the mansion feels less like a place of strict control and more like a space holding something unresolved, something waiting to surface. Ethan moves through his routine with the same precision, reviewing reports, taking calls, maintaining the image he has built over years. Yet his focus fractures in small, almost imperceptible ways. A sentence repeated twice. A pause that lasts a second too long. Each disruption traces back to the same source, the same unanswered question that now follows him everywhere. Downstairs, Lily continues her work without interruption. She cleans, organizes, prepares, always in silence, always in control of herself. But as she moves through the east corridor again, something draws her attention. The same door Ethan had stood in front of the previous morning now sits slightly ajar, open just enough to reveal a sliver of the room beyond. The difference is subtle, but undeniable. Lily slows her steps, her gaze resting on the narrow opening. She does not move closer immediately. Instead, she stands still, as if measuring the weight of the moment. Then, with quiet care, she approaches. The room inside is dim, the curtains partially drawn, allowing only a soft line of light to fall across the floor. It is not like the rest of the house. There is no sharp order here, no polished perfection. Instead, the space feels untouched, preserved, as if time itself has been held still within these walls. A bed sits neatly made, but unused. A small table holds a few personal items, a book, a pair of reading glasses, a delicate porcelain box. And on the far wall, more photographs. Lily steps inside slowly, her movements instinctively softer, as if she understands that this is not a place meant for noise. Her eyes move across the room, taking in each detail, not with curiosity, but with quiet recognition. She stops in front of one of the photographs. It is the same woman from the hallway, but here she is smiling more openly, standing beside a younger version of Ethan. His expression is different, less guarded, less distant. For a moment, Lily's hand lifts slightly, as if she might reach toward the frame, but she stops herself before making contact. Footsteps sound suddenly behind her. Sharp. Immediate. What are you doing in here? Ethan's voice cuts through the room, colder than before, but carrying something else beneath it, something closer to alarm. Lily turns slowly, her expression unchanged, her posture calm. She does not step back. She does not rush to explain. She simply stands there, meeting his gaze for a brief second before lowering her eyes again. Ethan steps into the room fully now, his presence filling the space in a way that feels almost intrusive, even to himself. His eyes move quickly around the room, checking, confirming, as if making sure nothing has been disturbed. This room is off limits, he says, his voice controlled, but tighter than usual. No one enters here without my permission. Lily remains silent. The same silence, the same steady composure. But this time it feels different. This time, it feels like it holds something more. Ethan studies her closely, his gaze narrowing. Did someone tell you to come here? He presses. No answer. Just that quiet presence that refuses to bend, refuses to react in the way he expects. His frustration rises, but it is not the same sharp anger as before. It is tangled with something else now, something unfamiliar, something that makes him hesitate. Look at me, he says again, softer this time, but no less intense. Lily lifts her eyes, and for a moment, everything stills. There is no fear in her expression, no defiance, only a quiet understanding that reaches further than words ever could. It unsettles him more than anything she has done so far. He looks away, first again, breaking the connection abruptly. Leave, he says, his voice returning to its controlled edge. Lily nods once and walks past him without a word, her steps as steady as ever. As she exits the room, the silence returns, but it does not feel empty anymore. Ethan remains where he is, standing in the middle of the space he has kept untouched for so long. His eyes move slowly toward the photograph on the wall, the one Lily had been looking at. For the first time in years, he steps closer to it, not out of habit, not out of control, but because something has been stirred that he can no longer ignore. And deep within him, beneath the layers of discipline and distance, a memory begins to surface, fragile, persistent, and impossible to silence. The house grows quieter after that moment, but the silence is no longer passive. It begins to feel like something alive, something that moves through the halls and settles into every room, carrying with it the weight of what has been left unsaid. Ethan does not return to the office immediately after Lily leaves the room. Instead, he remains there longer than he intends, standing near the photograph, his eyes fixed on the image as if searching for something that has been missing for years. His mother's smile looks unchanged, preserved in time, untouched by the distance he has placed between himself and everything she once represented. But now, something about it feels closer. Not because the image has changed, but because something inside him has shifted. The thought unsettles him. He turns abruptly and leaves the room, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary, as if trying to seal the memory back inside. Downstairs, the staff continues their routine, but a quiet tension has begun to spread. The housekeeper watches Lily more closely now, her expression carrying a mixture of concern and confusion. "You should be careful," she says in a low voice as Lily folds a set of freshly pressed linens. Mr. Blackwood does not like boundaries being crossed. Lily pauses briefly, her hands resting on the fabric, then resumes her work without responding. The silence is no longer just her nature. It has become something stronger, something that shapes the space around her. Later that afternoon, Ethan calls for her. The request comes through the intercom, sharp and direct. "Lily, my office. Now." The words echo faintly through the mansion. Lily sets aside what she is doing and walks toward the staircase, her steps steady, her posture unchanged. When she enters the office, Ethan is standing by the window, his back turned, his hands resting lightly behind him. The city stretches beyond the glass, distant and controlled, just like everything else in his life. He does not turn immediately. "You went into that room," he says finally, his voice calm, but edged with something deeper. It is not a question. It is an accusation wrapped in restraint. Lily stands quietly near the doorway. No answer. Ethan exhales slowly, as if forcing himself to remain composed. "That room is not part of your duties," he continues. "It is not a place for staff. It is not a place for anyone." He turns now, his gaze locking onto hers. "And yet you walked in as if you belonged there." The words hang in the air, heavier than before. Lily meets his eyes for a brief moment, then lowers her gaze again. Her silence remains unchanged, but something about it feels different now. Less distant, more deliberate. Ethan studies her closely, his frustration rising, but it no longer feels simple. "Say something," he demands, the edge in his voice sharper now. "Explain yourself." For a second, it seems like nothing will happen, like the silence will remain unbroken as it always has. But then, slowly, Lily lifts her head. Her voice, when it comes, is quiet but steady. "It did not feel empty," she says. The words are simple, but they land with unexpected weight. Ethan freezes, his expression tightening. He had not expected that. Not words. Not from her. Not like this. Lily continues, her voice still calm, still controlled. It felt like someone was still there. The room falls completely silent. Not the usual silence of the mansion, but something deeper, something that presses against the walls and fills the space between them. Ethan's jaw tightens, his control slipping for the briefest moment. "You do not get to decide what that room feels like," he says, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "You do not get to interpret it." Lily does not react to the warning. She does not retreat. She simply stands there, her presence steady, her expression unchanged. But the words she has spoken remain, echoing in a way that cannot be undone. Ethan turns away abruptly, his hand pressing briefly against the edge of his desk as if grounding himself. The room, the memory, the photograph, everything he has kept contained for so long now feels closer than it should. And for the first time, it is not anger that rises within him. It is something else, something that feels dangerously close to being seen. "Leave," he says finally, his voice controlled again, but quieter than before. Lily nods once and turns, walking out of the office without another word. As the door closes behind her, Ethan remains where he is, staring out at the city, but no longer seeing it clearly. Her words linger, repeating in his mind, breaking through the walls he has built around himself. It did not feel empty, and somewhere deep within him, something he has tried to bury begins to surface, not as a memory alone, but as a question he can no longer ignore. The silence after Lily leaves the office does not fade. It tightens. It lingers in the walls, in the air, in the space Ethan Blackwood can no longer fully control. By the next morning, something in him has shifted, but not in a way that softens him. It sharpens him. If her silence unsettles him, then he will break it. That is how his world has always worked. Pressure creates response. Control creates obedience. And anything that resists must be corrected. Downstairs, the staff prepares for another full day. But there's an unspoken tension that runs deeper now. Lily continues her routine as always, her movements calm, her expression steady, as if nothing has changed. But everything has. When she steps into the main hall, carrying a tray of fresh linens, Ethan is already there, waiting. He does not call out this time. He simply watches her approach, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed. The moment she steps into the center of the hall, his voice cuts through the silence. "Stop!" Lily halts immediately, her hands steady, her posture unchanged. Ethan walks toward her slowly, deliberately, each step measured. The distance between them closes, and the air seems to tighten with it. "You think you understand things that are not yours to understand," he says, his voice low, controlled, but carrying an edge that is sharper than before. Lily does not respond. Ethan steps closer, his presence now overwhelming the space around her. "You walk into rooms you're not allowed in. You speak when you're not asked to speak. You decide what something feels like as if your opinion matters here." Each word lands heavier than the last. Several staff members nearby freeze, their attention drawn despite themselves. They know this tone. They know what follows. Ethan turns slightly, making sure his voice carries just enough for others to hear. "Let me make something clear," he continues. "You are not here because you belong here. You are here because you are hired to do a job. Nothing more. And if you cannot follow that, you can leave." The words hang in the air, sharp and public. It is not just correction now. It is humiliation. Lily stands still, the tray balanced perfectly in her hands. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, slowly, she lowers the tray onto a nearby table with careful precision. Her movements are calm, unhurried, untouched by the tension around her. She straightens and lifts her eyes, meeting Ethan's gaze fully this time. The room quiets even further, as if waiting for something to break. But what comes is not what anyone expects. Lily does not argue. She does not defend herself. She does not plead. Instead, her voice emerges, soft but steady. "I know I do not belong here," she says. The words are simple, but they land with a weight that shifts the entire room. Ethan's expression tightens, but he does not interrupt. Lily continues, her gaze unwavering. "But neither do you." The silence that follows is absolute. It is no longer controlled. It is stunned. For the first time, something cracks openly. Not in her. In him. Ethan's breath stills for a fraction of a second, his control slipping just enough to be felt. The words hit deeper than they should, cutting through something he has spent years protecting. Around them, the staff remains frozen, unsure whether to look away or stay still. Lily does not move. She does not lower her gaze this time. She simply stands there, her presence steady, her expression unchanged, but her words echoing in a way that cannot be undone. Ethan steps back slightly, the movement small but noticeable. His jaw tightens, his eyes darkening, but the anger that should rise does not come as cleanly as before. It is tangled now with something else, something far more dangerous. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then, finally, his voice returns quieter but heavier than before. "Get out." Lily nods once, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, and turns away. She walks past him without hesitation, her steps steady, her posture unchanged. As she disappears down the hallway, the silence remains, but it has transformed completely. It no longer belongs to Ethan. It no longer bends to his control. It has become something else entirely. And as Ethan stands there, surrounded by the space he once ruled without question, he realizes something he has never had to face before. For the first time in his life, someone did not break under him. And somehow, without raising her voice, without fighting back, she has forced him to look at something he has been avoiding for years. Not her place in this house, but his own. The impact of her words does not fade when the hallway empties. It deepens, spreading through Ethan Blackwood in a way he cannot control or silence. For the rest of the day, the mansion continues its routine, staff moving quietly, tasks completed with precision, but something fundamental has shifted. The air itself feels different, as if the balance of power has been disturbed in a way that cannot simply be corrected. Ethan retreats to his office, but work no longer holds his attention. Documents sit untouched on his desk, numbers blurring together, meaningless against the echo of a single sentence repeating in his mind. You do not belong here. He exhales slowly, pressing his fingers against his temple as if trying to force the thought away, but it does not leave. It grows sharper, clearer, refusing to be ignored. Without fully deciding to, he stands and walks out of the office, his steps quicker now, less measured than usual. He moves down the corridor, past the main hall, past the rooms he has always controlled, until he reaches the door he has avoided for years. This time, he does not hesitate. He opens it. The room greets him with the same quiet stillness, unchanged, untouched, but now it feels different to him. Not distant, not sealed away, present. He steps inside slowly, his gaze moving across the space, taking in details he has not allowed himself to see for a long time. The bed, the table, the photographs. The air feels heavier here, filled with something that has waited patiently for his return. He walks toward the photograph on the wall, the one Lily had stood in front of. His mother's face looks back at him, calm, warm, unguarded. For a moment, he says nothing. Then, almost without realizing it, he speaks, his voice quieter than it has ever been. I built everything the way it was supposed to be, he says, as if explaining himself to someone who is no longer there. No mistakes, no weakness, no room for anything to break. The words feel hollow the moment they leave him. His jaw tightens, his gaze dropping slightly. A memory rises, uninvited but undeniable. A hospital room, the sound of a monitor, his mother's voice, softer than anything in this house has ever allowed. Not asking for perfection, not asking for control, asking him to live. The memory presses against him, and for the first time, he does not push it away. He lets it stay. Downstairs, Lily finishes her tasks quietly, but her movements slow just slightly, as if she senses something shifting above her. The housekeeper approaches her again, her voice low but urgent. What did you say to him? She asks. Lily pauses, her hands resting on the edge of the table, then shakes her head slightly. She does not answer. The housekeeper watches her for a moment longer, then steps away, unsettled by the calm that no longer feels passive, but purposeful. Upstairs, Ethan remains in the room longer than he intends. His hand lifts slowly, hesitating only for a second before finally touching the edge of the photograph frame. The contact is light, almost uncertain, but it is enough. The barrier he built between himself and this space begins to fracture. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to be felt. He exhales a slow, controlled breath that carries something unfamiliar with it. Not control, not authority, something closer to release. When he finally steps out of the room, he does not close the door fully. It remains slightly open, just enough to break the illusion that it is sealed away from the rest of the house. That night, the mansion feels different. The silence is still there, but it no longer belongs entirely to him. It has changed, softened at the edges, carrying something new within it. Ethan stands alone in the main hall, his gaze distant, his posture less rigid than before. He does not call for Lily. He does not issue new rules. For the first time, He does nothing. And in that stillness, he begins to understand something he has never allowed himself to see. Control did not protect him. It isolated him. And the silence he once commanded was never empty. It was waiting for something real to break through it. And now, whether he is ready or not, it has. The next morning does not arrive with the same weight as before, but it does not feel light either. It feels different, as if something within the mansion has shifted just enough to change the way the air moves through it. For the first time since Lily Carter stepped into this house, the silence does not press down. It breathes. Downstairs, the staff begins their routine, but their movements are quieter, more careful, as if they are all waiting for something they cannot name. Lily moves among them, as she always has, her posture steady, her expression calm, her presence unchanged on the surface. But beneath that stillness, something has settled. Not tension, not fear, something closer to resolve. She prepares the morning tea, measures the water, sets the tray with the same precision as every day before. But there is no hesitation in her movements, no trace of the conflict that unfolded the day before. When she walks toward the main hall, she does not look up the staircase, but she knows he is there. Ethan stands at the top of the stairs, watching her. He has been there for several minutes, unmoving, his gaze following her in a way it never has before. There is no sharpness in his expression now, no immediate judgment, only observation, and something else, something quieter. Lily reaches the bottom step and pauses for a brief moment, not out of uncertainty, but as if acknowledging the space between them. Then she continues forward, passing beneath him without a word. Ethan exhales slowly, his hand tightening slightly against the railing. The instinct to speak rises, the familiar urge to control, to correct, to define the moment before it slips beyond him. But this time he does not act on it. He turns instead and walks down the stairs, his steps slower, less deliberate than before. Wait, he says. The word is softer than it has ever been, but it carries through the space just the same. Lily stops. She turns to face him, her posture straight, her expression calm, her eyes steady. Ethan closes the distance between them, stopping just a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The silence returns, but it is not the same silence as before. It does not belong to him anymore. It exists between them, shared, balanced. Ethan looks at her, really looks this time, not searching for a reaction, not measuring her against his expectations, but trying to understand something he has not allowed himself to. See, you said something yesterday. He begins, his voice quieter, less certain. About that room. He pauses, as if the words themselves feel unfamiliar. Lily does not respond. She waits. Ethan's gaze shifts slightly, his composure tightening for a second before loosening again. You said did not feel empty, he continues. The memory lingers in the space between them. Lily nods once, a small, steady acknowledgement. Ethan studies her, then looks away briefly, as if gathering something he does not know how to express. When he speaks again, his voice has changed. It is still controlled, but there is something beneath it now, something more human, more uncertain. It was my mother's room, he says. The admission hangs in the air, quiet but heavy. Lily does not react outwardly, but something in her gaze softens just slightly, almost imperceptible. Ethan continues, his words slower now, as if each one requires effort. I kept it the same, exactly the same, so nothing would be lost. He pauses again, his jaw tightening slightly. But I never went back in. The truth settles between them, unguarded, exposed in a way he has never allowed before. Lily remains silent, but this time, the silence does not feel like distance. It feels like presence, like she is there, fully, without needing to fill the space with words. Ethan exhales slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction. When you said it did not feel empty, he says, his voice barely above a murmur now, I did not know what that meant. He looks at her again, his gaze searching, but not demanding. Do you, he hesitates, the word unfamiliar on his tongue, understand why? Lily holds his gaze for a moment, then gives a small nod. Not an answer in words, but something more certain. something that does not challenge him, does not judge him, but acknowledges him. Ethan's breath catches slightly, the response landing deeper than he expected. For a long moment, neither of them moves. Then, slowly he steps back, not in authority, not in control, but in something closer to respect. "You can continue your work," he says, his voice steady again, but softer than before. Lily nods once and turns, continuing down the hall with the same quiet precision. But the distance between them is no longer the same. As she walks away, Ethan remains where he is, watching her for a moment longer. Then he turns, not toward his office, not toward control, but toward the hallway that leads to the room he had closed off for so long. This time, when he reaches the door, he does not hesitate. He opens it fully and steps inside, not as someone guarding the past, but as someone finally willing to face it. And for the first time, the silence in that room does not feel like something to escape. It feels like something he can finally understand. The change does not arrive with a grand gesture. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first shift of light before sunrise. Over the next few days, the mansion continues its routine, but something fundamental has altered in the way Ethan Blackwood moves through it. The sharp edges of his control remain, but they no longer cut as deeply. His voice, once cold and immediate, now pauses before it speaks. His presence, once overwhelming, now holds space instead of crushing it. The staff notices first. Instructions are still given, but they are no longer delivered with the same weight of judgment. Corrections come without humiliation. Silence no longer feels like a weapon. And at the center of it all, Lily Carter continues her work, unchanged on the surface, but now moving within a space that no longer resists her presence. One evening, as the sun lowers behind the distant hills and soft amber light fills the main hall, Ethan stands near the staircase, watching as Lily prepares the room for the night. She adjusts the arrangement of flowers on the console table, her movements gentle, precise, as if every action carries intention beyond its task. For a moment, he simply observes. Then, without calling out sharply, without breaking the quiet, he walks toward her. Lily senses him before he speaks. She finishes adjusting the final detail and steps back, her posture steady as she turns to face him. Ethan stops a few feet away, the distance deliberate, respectful in a way that would have been unthinkable before. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The silence returns, but it is no longer heavy. It feels balanced, shared. Ethan inhales slowly, as if preparing for something unfamiliar. "The photograph," he says, his voice calm, measured. In the hallway, Lily listens, her gaze steady. Ethan continues, his tone quieter now. "You cleaned it." It is not an accusation. It is an acknowledgement. Lily gives a small nod. Ethan's eyes shift briefly, as if searching for the right words, something he has not had to find in a long time. "No one has touched it in years," he says. "I did not want it changed." He pauses, his expression tightening slightly, not with anger, but with something closer to vulnerability. "But you did not change it." The realization settles between them. Lily remains silent, but her presence feels different now. Not distant, not separate, but connected in a way that does not require explanation. Ethan exhales slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction. "You took care of it," he says, the words softer than anything he has said before. Lily's gaze softens slightly, her silence now carrying something warmer, something that acknowledges the shift without needing to define it. For a long moment, they stand there, the space between them filled not with tension, but with something fragile and new. Then Ethan does something no one in this house has ever seen. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small object. It is simple, unremarkable at first glance. A delicate silver key attached to a thin chain. He holds it in his hand for a second, as if weighing its meaning before extending it toward her. Lily looks at the key, then back at him, her expression unchanged but her attention fully present. "That room," Ethan says, his voice steady but quiet. "It should not stay closed anymore." The words carry more than instruction. They carry trust. Lily hesitates for a brief moment, not out of uncertainty, but out of understanding. She reaches out slowly and takes the key from his hand. The contact is brief, but it lingers, not as something accidental, but as something real. Ethan does not pull away immediately. For a fraction of a second, the connection remains, grounding both of them in a moment neither of them expected to reach. Then he steps back, his posture easing, not into authority, but into something closer to openness. You can decide what to do with it, he says. The statement is simple, but it changes everything. For the first time, control is not being enforced. It is being released. Lily closes her hand gently around the key, her fingers wrapping around the cool metal. She nods once, not as a servant receiving an order, but as someone accepting something deeper. As she turns and walks toward the hallway, the key resting in her hand, the mansion feels different once again. The silence that once defined it has transformed completely. It is no longer empty. It is no longer controlled. It is alive, filled with something that grows quietly, steadily, with every step she takes. And behind her, Ethan remains where he is, watching, not as someone who commands the space, but as someone who is finally learning how to share it. The following morning arrives with a quiet clarity that feels entirely new, as if the mansion itself has finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. Light pours through the tall windows more freely now, stretching across the floors without resistance, touching spaces that once felt closed and distant. Lily Carter walks down the east corridor with a small silver key resting in her palm, her steps steady, her expression calm, as always, but something within her has shifted. She stops in front of the door, the one that once stood sealed, untouched, guarded by silence and memory. For a brief moment, she does nothing. Then, with quiet intention, she lifts the key and unlocks it. The soft click echoes gently, not as a disruption, but as a beginning. She pushes the door open fully this time, allowing light to enter the room in a way it has not for years. Dust particles drift in the air, catching the sunlight, revealing a space that has been preserved but not lived in. Lily steps inside slowly, her presence gentle, respectful, but no longer hesitant. She moves to the windows first and draws the curtains open, letting the room breathe. The light changes everything. The stillness remains, but it no longer feels frozen. It feels present. She adjusts small details, not altering the room, but caring for it. Straightening a folded blanket, aligning a book, wiping a surface that has long been untouched. Each movement is quiet, deliberate, and filled with something deeper than duty. Downstairs, Ethan Blackwood stands near the base of the staircase, his gaze fixed toward the hallway above. He does not move immediately. He listens. The faint sounds of movement from the room reach him. Not loud, not intrusive, but real. For a long moment, he remains still. Then slowly he begins to walk. His steps are not as rigid as they once were. They carry hesitation, but also something else. Willingness. When he reaches the doorway, he stops. The sight before him is simple, but it changes everything. The room is no longer closed. It is filled with light. Lily stands near the window, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the curtain, her posture calm, her presence steady. She turns slightly when she senses him, her gaze meeting his without surprise. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The silence returns, but it is no longer heavy, no longer filled with tension or control. It is open. Ethan steps inside slowly, his eyes moving across the room, taking in every detail. Nothing has been taken away. Nothing has been replaced. And yet everything feels different. He walks toward the photograph on the wall, his hand lifting, this time without hesitation, touching the frame fully. The contact grounds him in a way he has not felt in years. He exhales, a slow, steady breath that carries the weight of something finally released. I thought keeping it closed would protect it, he says quietly. Lily does not interrupt. She does not fill the space. She simply listens. Ethan's gaze softens slightly, his voice lowering further. But only kept me out. The realization settles fully now. No longer something distant or abstract, but something real, something he can finally accept. Lily takes a small step closer, not to close the distance, but to share the space. She does not speak. She does not need to. Her presence is enough. Ethan turns toward her, his expression no longer guarded, no longer distant. For the first time, there is no control in his gaze, no expectation, no command. Only honesty. "You changed this house," he says, his voice steady but quiet. Lily shakes her head gently. "No," she answers softly. "You did." The words are simple, but they land with clarity. Not blame, not praise. Truth. Ethan holds her gaze for a moment, then nods slowly, accepting it. The silence between them settles once more, but now it feels complete. Not empty, not waiting, complete. Days pass, and the mansion continues to change, not in structure, but in feeling. The staff moves with less tension. The halls carry warmth where there was once only distance. And Ethan no longer walks through his home as someone guarding it, but as someone living within it. Lily remains, not as a presence that disrupts, but as one that belongs, quietly, naturally, without needing permission. One evening, as the sun sets beyond the hills and the house fills with soft golden light, Ethan stands beside her near the window of the once closed room. Neither of them speaks. They do not need to. The silence is transformed into something neither of them fears anymore. Something steady, something real. And in that quiet, in that shared space, the distance between who they were and who they have become finally disappears, leaving behind not control, not resistance, but something far more powerful. Understanding. And from that understanding, something deeper begins to grow. Not forced, not demanded, simply allowed. Love.